Horror in Pittsburgh in a synagogue as a maniac fueled by hate opens fire on worshipers. Hello and welcome to a special 2-hour edition of Justice. I'm Jeanine Pirro. Thanks for being with us tonight. We're going to talk politics a little later, but first the latest on what's been a tragic day in America. At least 11 people are dead and several more, including 4 police officers, are injured after a gunman walked into the Tree of Life synagogue in Pittsburgh and opened fire. The horrific act taking place during a baby naming ceremony. Officials have confirmed tonight that the victims were apparently targeted for one reason: their faith. Here's what we know about the shooting suspect right now. He is 46-year-old Robert Bowers, a man who apparently had made anti-Semitic comments online, but was not specifically known to law enforcement before today's massacre. He was injured in what investigators believe was a shootout with police, but is in custody and is expected to survive. President Trump has condemned the hate-filled crime as a, quote, wicked act of mass murder. But the president did go on with a planned political rally earlier this evening in Illinois. Here is some of what he said.
Before going any further, I want to address the horrible shooting that took place earlier today. The hearts of all Americans are filled with grief following the monstrous killing of Jewish Americans at the Tree of Life synagogue in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. You've all seen it. You've been watching it. It's horrible. The suspect is in custody. The federal authorities are on the scene and leading an aggressive federal investigation. State and local law enforcement has been incredible. This evil anti-Semitic attack is an assault on all of us. It's an assault on humanity. It will require all of us working together to extract the hateful poison of anti-Semitism from our world. This was an anti-Semitic attack at its worst. The scourge of anti-Semitism cannot be ignored, cannot be tolerated, and it cannot be allowed to continue. We can't allow it to continue. It must be confronted and condemned everywhere it rears its very ugly head. We must stand with our Jewish brothers and sisters to defeat anti-Semitism and vanquish the forces of hate. That's what it is. Through the centuries, the Jews have endured terrible persecution, and you know that. We've all read it, we've studied it. They've gone through a lot. And those seeking their destruction, we will seek their destruction. Now, when you have crimes like this, whether it's this one or another one on another group, we have to bring back the death penalty. They have to pay the ultimate price. They have to pay the ultimate price. They can't do this. They can't do this to our country. We must draw a line in the sand and say very strongly, never again.
And we'll hear live from the president's son, Eric Trump, in a moment. First, though, let's get the latest on the shooting from Fox News reporter Garrett Tenney, live in Pittsburgh.
And Judge, several seasoned law enforcement officials have described this scene as the most horrific they have ever seen. Several dozen people were inside the Tree of Life synagogue this morning for Shabbat services, including some, as you mentioned, that were for a child blessing naming ceremony. It was around 9:45, or 9:53, just after those services had begun, when a man walked in with an assault rifle and 3 handguns, and he reportedly yelled, "All Jews must die," before he opened fire. Within a couple of minutes, the gunman had killed 11 people and injured 2 others. As he started to walk out, officers arrived on the scene and engaged him. he shot one of the officers and ran back inside, where he continued an engaging gunfire with SWAT officers as they tried to talk to him. By the end, he had shot 2 more officers, received several gun wounds himself before he surrendered. This evening, Pennsylvania's governor said words cannot express the way his state feels tonight.
My heart breaks for the members of the Jewish community. Today, all of Pennsylvania mourns with you. Anti-Semitism has absolutely no place in our Commonwealth. Any attack on one community of faith in Pennsylvania is an attack against every community of faith in Pennsylvania.
The FBI has identified 46-year-old Robert Bowers as the suspect. They say he is from here in the Pittsburgh area, and there's not a whole lot they know about him at this point. They are trying to gather up more of his background, who he was, what he's been up to, what potentially led him to commit this attack. We do know that he was believed at this point to have been not have been on law enforcement's radar prior to today's shooting. But they are searching several of his residences that he was associated with here, including an apartment. And earlier tonight, some neighbors of that apartment told local reporters that he was quiet, kept to himself, but they said they didn't see any red flags throughout. And that's a common theme we hear in situations like this, Judge. The FBI says that they do plan this to be a full, wide investigation that will be covering every aspect of this man's life. They are digging into his social media presence, and one of the things they are investigating is the possibility that he may have announced his intentions to carry out this shooting on social media. This afternoon, the social media site Gab, which bills itself as a free speech alternative to Twitter, said it verified and then suspended an account that was linked with his name. And on that account, the account had made several anti-Semitic posts, including one just before the shooting this morning, which concluded with, quote, "I'm going in." Now, we're just getting word that the U.S. Attorney for the Western District of Pennsylvania has filed charges against that suspect just in the last few minutes. Earlier, Attorney General Jeff Sessions said those federal charges would include hate crime charges and would include the possibility of the death penalty. Judge?
Garrett Tenney, thanks so much. And joining me now on the phone, Executive Vice President of the Trump Organization and the president's son, Eric Trump. He joins me now by phone. Good evening, Eric.
Good evening, Judge. How are you?
Your reaction, Eric, to the horror that happened today in a place of worship in Pittsburgh.
Listen, America mourns, right? I mean, this whack job destroyed lives. He upended a community. He should get the death penalty. I mean, there's no question about it. He should absolutely get the death penalty. You know, there's 11 people who are no longer on this earth because of his actions. And it's horrible. And you know what we do in time like this also need to give a major shout-out to law enforcement, because the job they did today was incredible. I mean, just absolutely incredible.
Right, and I'm going to talk about that more with some of my law enforcement guests. But, you know, Eric, as we look at the news of the past week, is it a sign of the times? Yesterday, someone arrested for sending pipe bombs to several people, and then today, this individual shooting up in a place of worship and killing 11 people, 6 more injured. Is this a sign of the rhetoric and the outrage that people are hearing? Is there any correlation between the two?
I don't know. Listen, there might be and there might not be. I mean, at the end of the day, this is obviously a very sick, deranged human, subhuman. He shouldn't even be called a human, but, you know, I mean, it's a very, very sick, deranged person. They did this. And, you know, it seems like we've gotten to a point in life and society where everything has to be kind of politicized. Everything has to be, you know, somebody has to point the political finger to absolutely everything. I mean, at the end of this day, this guy is a sick person. He did the most unthinkable thing imaginable. He went to a place of worship, shot it up. Again, there are 11 people who are dead now because of it. And, you know, I think we should actually try and pull politics out of some of these things. I mean, this person doesn't represent the left. He doesn't represent the right. The person was sick, deranged. And, again, I truly hope, if found guilty, which he will be, that he gets the death penalty. All
right, and certainly a good point in not viewing everything through the political lenses that people seem to be looking through these days. But let me ask you about your dad. Your dad indicated today that he thought about actually canceling the rally. But he said something interesting. He said, we don't want to let those crazies control, what we do. And it kind of reminds me, Eric, I mean, you were in New York, in New York City on 2001, 9/11, as was I, where we all said we're not going to let these crazy people stop us from conducting our ordinary everyday affairs. Do you think your dad should have gone through with that rally?
I do, and I thought he said it beautifully. I mean, he said you can't let evil change your life, and I think that's 100% right. I mean, if every single time evil lashed out, it changed everybody's pattern, it changed their lives, it changed society, society stopped, you'd live in a much different world. And, it's always incidents like this, whether it be the 9/11s or, tragic shootings like the one we had today that actually brings America together. And, clearly the person is trying to tear apart, our country apart, a community apart. They're trying to do massive evil. And it's amazing how the world works that, sometimes it actually does the exact opposite. Once you get past the horrible act, it actually brings society together. And, you have an entire country that's mourning for, a small town in Pennsylvania and for a specific synagogue and for a group of people, again, whose lives were upended. And so, this does bring America together in a time where, you can say that, America can often be fractured because of, so many different, variables.
I think the sad part, it's always sad, but the selection of a particular group based upon their religion in a place of worship on Shabbat. I mean, it is a particularly heinous act. But let's talk about what's going to happen in the next 8 or 9 days, the midterms. How does America turn from its focus on some of these horrific things that we're seeing daily in the news to focusing on what's important in terms of the country continuing on the course that it's on, and getting people to focus on real politics as opposed to the rhetoric that is making up politics?
Well, and you do hope they focus on the real issues as opposed to rhetoric. This obviously aside, because this is absolutely horrible what happened, and you have other tragedies. I mean, obviously look at the hurricane that hit North Florida, the Panhandle of Florida so hard. But obviously those are unthinkable things. But you do think that people can get past some of the other rhetoric that they see in the media every single day, because Judge, America's winning right now. I mean, we're winning. Our economy's winning. Our military's winning. Our veterans are winning. I mean, just about everything's winning. I mean, we've got the fastest growing GDP and, one of the fastest growing GDPs in the history of the country. We have the lowest unemployment. Manufacturing's coming back to this country. The stock markets are at record highs. 401ks have done tremendously well, and I can go on and on and on. The price for prescription drugs is coming down, something that my father made a big focus on last week. I mean, I could talk about it for hours, but, I mean, our country is thriving. We're no longer getting ripped off by China. We're no longer getting ripped off by Mexico. We're the envy of the world right now. I mean, America is the envy of the world, and it's hard to say in a day like today when something so tragic happened. But our economy is doing great. Our country is doing great. We're just rated the #1 economy on Earth, and so you hope a lot of the rhetoric gets put aside, and you hope people focus on all the positive attributes and, the many great things that's happening in our country right now.
But, when you talk about it, Eric, it's almost as though there isn't one metric that hasn't improved under your father, and yet the left is so dug in, so angry. And when you see, the rhetoric of people who are congresswomen, congressmen, you wonder how you can get people to take their sights off of that anger and turn it towards something positive.
Yeah, it's almost amazing. When you're doing the best, it's almost people are the most angry, and it's kind of interesting. And I've seen it personally, where you see a lot of the left lashing out, and they don't have a great message right now. They want to double people's taxes. They want to constantly attack law enforcement. Again, days like today make that just unthinkable. I mean, they're the bravest men and women that we have in the country, but
without a doubt,
the country is doing amazingly well. We're winning. We're winning on every metric, and if you can put aside the rhetoric, and you can actually look at quantifiable, statistics and quantifiable measures, our country is doing the best it's ever done before. And as Americans, hopefully days like today make us rally around that we are Americans, that we all, bleed the same red, white, and blue. I mean, we love this country. We love our nation. We want our nation to be successful,
and our people to be safe.
Everybody should cool it down a little bit.
Yes. All right. Eric Trump, thanks so much for joining us this evening.
Thanks, Judge. It's great to be here.
All right. Thank you. All right. Let's talk more about the suspect and where this investigation could go. Joining me now is the former member of the FBI Joint Terrorism Task Force, retired police officer Steve Rogers. All right, Steve. You got to tell me something I don't already know about this guy. I find out that not only is he has an active license to carry a firearm, okay, but in addition to that, he is a Trump hater. He rallied against the Jews. He had this blog. He posted on this blog, HIAS, which stands for Hebrew Immigration Aid Society. He says HIAS likes to bring in invaders that kill our people. I can't sit by and watch my people get slaughtered. I'm going in.
Well, Judge, I'll tell you something you don't know about the police response. First of all, people have asked me all day, how is it that the police were so effective so quickly on this Pennsylvania incident and the one in New York? And the answer is the President of the United States quickly and immediately mobilized federal law enforcement officers, the FBI, the ATF, you name it, the President sent them down. And as a result, they quickly closed the case in New York. And you're going to get all the answers to those questions in PA. And let me add this. Did we not forget that it was the prior administration that took the tactical equipment police needed today to nail that guy in PA? It was President Trump who restored it.
Isn't that interesting? I remember this. Under the Obama administration, they were taking this stuff away, this tactical equipment. All right.
President Trump gave it back.
All right. All right. So we've got that. And obviously that is great. And this was an incredible amount of time in terms of how they got in there and how this coward went back in. And unfortunately, now we've got 4 police officers injured, I believe.
Yes.
All right. So this guy, we know that he had a license to carry a firearm, correct?
Yes.
All right. Do we know anything more about it? It's an active license. How did he get it?
Well, these are the questions that are certainly going to be asked. As you know, it's a long investigation, but they're going to try to find out where the weapons came from, how did he actually get it. They're going to do forensic studies on all of his computer equipment, cell phones, etc. But you know what's going to be important here?
What?
The psychological profile that the criminal psychologists are going to make on this guy after they speak to him.
All right. You and I, both in law enforcement, talk to me like you're talking to the DA at the time, okay? Good. I don't really care what his motive is because the jury, although they may want to know it, you know, the proof is, did he commit the crime or did he not? Is he sane or is he insane? Do we know if the guy had a job? Did he function normally? Do we know anything about that?
Nothing about it right now, Judge, and these are the questions that are going to be answered. But did he do it? Of course he did it, as you said.
So then the only justification or the only excuse, not justification, that he can proffer is, I was nuts, I was mentally insane.
Judge, I don't even buy that. You know, we have people running around saying, oh, it's because of rhetoric, it's this and that.
Oh, that's hogwash.
Well, you're darn right it's hogwash. He is responsible for his actions. In regard to all the nonsense about rhetoric, what about the Hollywood movies and violence and all these other things that are around us that promote violence? What about that? Okay, so he's responsible for his actions, no one else.
And I'm going to add something else. The statement that I just read that he posted today indicates premeditation, clear intent, focus, lucid, clear, I'm going in. This guy is connected to time and space, and he knows exactly where he is.
Bring that before a jury, and a judge says guilty.
Guilty.
There you go.
Well, if the judge is, you know.
Jeanine.
All right, Steve Rogers, thanks so much for being with us tonight. We appreciate it.
My pleasure.
All right, take care.
Thank you, Your Honor.
All right, and our live coverage of this breaking story in Pittsburgh continues. Special 2-hour edition of Justice rolls on in a moment with guests including RNC Chair Ronna McDaniel, Corey Lewandowski, former Washington, D.C. Police Detective Ted Williams, and more. Back in a moment. Breaking tonight, 11 people inside a Pittsburgh synagogue are dead. More are injured, as are at least 4 police officers who responded to the scene. The gunman in custody. Joining me now to talk about the investigation and where we go from here, former Washington, D.C. police detective and defense attorney Ted Williams. Good evening, Ted. Tell me something I don't know.
Well, Judge, let me tell you something that you do know. I heard you in the last session with Steve Rogers talking about the insanity defense.
Yeah.
Let me just make sure we are clear here. This guy, as far as I'm concerned, was not insane whatsoever. When you think about it, he not only says at some stage on his social media site, I'm going in.
I'm going in,
when
yeah.
you look at premeditation, deliberation, all of the things, the prerequisites that are necessary for first degree, they're there. Not only do he go in, he shoots up the place, and guess what? He's sane enough to try to get out of there and run away from the police.
Go
and guess
get
what?
him, Ted.
At
That's
that
right.
stage, he runs back in. And this so-called insane man then goes up to the third floor, and this insane man shoots it out with the police. This man was not insane. And if I was the lawyer prosecuting this case, I would love to have it.
And if you're defending this case, Ted?
If I was defending this case, I would try to talk to people who knew him and to talk about maybe what his motivation was to try to mitigate and everything. But I got to also tell you something else. This guy was not a fan of the president.
Right.
If you notice, at times there's a segment of society that want to blame everything that happens in America on the president. Well, you can't do that, because if you go to this guy's social media site, you will read in there where he says this: Trump is a globalist, not a nationalist. There is no Make America Great Again. This is coming from Robert Bauer's site, Judge.
Well, you're right, Ted. You're right about that. Everybody assumes he's a right-winger because he ended up killing in a synagogue. There's no question. This guy didn't vote for Donald Trump. He didn't like Donald Trump. And he's not insane. He's focused. He's clear. He's intent on what he's doing, and he's plain evil. And you know what? I agree with the president. There's only one appropriate sentence in a case like this.
Wait a minute, Judge. Don't say it. Let me say it.
You say it.
The death penalty.
You got it.
They need to nail his butt and put him into the electric chair, just as he took 11 lives. Judge, just think about it. You walk into a church, a house of worship, and you take 11 lives. These were very vulnerable, decent people who are not going home to their families tonight.
You know what, Ted? You talk about this is a hate crime. We both know it's a hate crime.
Absolutely.
Hate crimes don't just affect the individual who's been victimized. They have a ripple effect in the community. It is not only the individual who's being taken out in a box to a morgue and then in a box. It's a whole community who suffers from a fear that because they're a part of that community, that they're going to be the next victim. The ripple effect is huge.
The ripple effect goes way out. And as a matter of fact, it goes throughout the country, Judge. As a matter of fact, in New York, where you are, the law enforcement officers there are putting additional protection on synagogues.
As they should.
Absolutely.
Well, you know, and let's talk about it, Ted. I mean, you know, there were so many people who were against additional punishments for hate crimes, but every state in the union now, as I understand it, has hate crime penalties that are more serious because they recognize the seriousness and how expansive these crimes are, how they go beyond the individual victim. But what pains me is that there are still people who focus on hate. This guy hates Jews. A couple of days ago, I believe in Kentucky, one guy goes in and he shoots a couple of African Americans, and when a white guy takes out a gun to shoot him, he says, "Oh, don't worry about it. I'm not going to shoot you. You're white." I mean, this kind of hate is horrible, and I don't understand, other than they're ignorant, they're arrogant, and they don't deserve to breathe the same air that you and I breathe.
And you just said it. They don't deserve to breathe the same air. And this is one reason why I'm taking my hat off to the Justice Department tonight, that they are looking to prosecute this guy Bowers under the hate crime statute, because under that statute, Judge, on the federal level, it carries the death penalty.
That's right.
So therefore, this guy could very well be looking at being put to death.
Yes, yes. All right. Ted Williams, thanks so much for being with us tonight and for all you've done today. And much more on tonight's breaking news ahead. But next, we're going to talk about the march to the midterms. We're just over a week away. RNC Chair Ronna McDaniel joins me live next. Welcome back to this special 2-hour edition of Justice. I'm Jeanine Pirro, and we've been following breaking news. A massacre inside a synagogue in Pittsburgh. 11 people killed, at least 6 injured, including several police officers who responded to the scene. The shooter, a hate-filled anti-Semite, identified by police as Robert Bowers, shot and injured, but in police custody. Much more coming up throughout this 2-hour edition of Justice. But first, here to weigh in on tonight's breaking news and more as we head into the final stretch before the midterm elections, RNC Chairwoman Ronna McDaniel. Good evening, Ronna. Thanks for being with us tonight. Your reaction to some of the events of the past week. Let's start with today and the shooting in the synagogue.
Well, my heart goes out to those families and the whole Jewish community that's been affected by this violent, evil, murderous hate act. And I'm proud of the President and the Justice Department that has said they're going to prosecute under the hate crime statute that will bring the maximum penalty of the death penalty. But all of America is grieving right now for Pittsburgh and this community that has been so tragically impacted by the events of today. You know, and yesterday, Ronna, an individual arrested for sending those, I believe, I don't know how many pipe bombs to several people in office, and those who are literally Trump haters. Do you think that the rhetoric of today is impacting the way people are conducting themselves? Well, I think there's a common denominator in all of these things, and it's evil. And these people are deranged and evil that are committing these acts. And I don't think, as Eric said earlier, you need to look at their political affiliations or their, their party affiliation. It's about who these individuals are, and they're deranged and they're evil. And the president has taken the lead and said, we need to unite as a country against these hateful acts, and it's a time for civility. And he said last night, I was with him in the rally in North Carolina, he said, let's start focusing on the policies that we're putting forward as a government, and not on ways that we can divide each other. And I think that's the right stance, and I hope Democrats will come to the table. I know that right now, Democrats and Republicans are coming together to mourn what happened in Pittsburgh. This is not a partisan event. This is something that brings Americans together as we grieve for those who are suffering. Well, you know, that is certainly a hope because, we are all Americans, and this kind of evil can't divide us. If there is any silver lining, maybe it will bring us together. But, to make a left turn here, midterms 9 days away. How do you get the country to focus on the issues as opposed to, number one, the rhetoric? Or how do you get people to get out of their homes when you and I both know 10 days ago, because of Kavanaugh and all of the other stuff that have been happening and the caravan, people couldn't wait to get to the voting booths. Now, I'm not so sure if things haven't been tamped down with all this violence. Well, that's where the RNC has put together, why the RNC has put together the largest field program we've had in history. We've had 60 million voter contacts thus far. We've trained 25,000 field organizers across the country. We've raised over $269 million. And all of that is so that we can make that final argument to voters in these closing days as to why we need to choose Republicans, why we need to retain the majority. And it is results versus resistance. We are the party that is delivering more jobs, higher wages, strengthening our military, caring for our law enforcement, holding them up as the heroes that they are, taking on the opioid crisis, taking on the pharmaceuticals. And the Democrats have continued to double down on two things: resist and obstruct. So the party is out there talking to voters. We are urging everybody to make sure you talk to your family, your friends. The only way we keep this comeback alive for this country is if you vote. Okay. And, what is the most important message you think that you can give to people? And, Eric Trump was on earlier and he talked about how every metric seemed to be improved under his dad's leadership. But what is the message that you hope is going to move people out? And who do you think is more motivated now? I mean, it depends on the minute at this point. Who's more motivated, the Republicans or the Democrats? Well, Democrats have been motivated. Opposition is motivating, and they're so mad that they didn't get the White House in 2016, so they've been energized. But Republicans are motivated too, and the party has seen that. We have seen a rise in our energy, and with the field program we've put together, and then putting President Trump out on the campaign trail and putting him in all these states. I mean, what he did last night in North Carolina, I was with him. He's going to be making that last-minute push, and he's going to say to voters, are you better off than you were 2 years ago? Is our country safer? Is our country stronger? Are we making America great again? And on every metric, voters are going to say yes. And Democrats are offering nothing except obstruct, resist, raising taxes, abolish ICE, open borders. It is a very clear contrast between the messages that are being delivered to voters. And Republicans, along with President Trump, are making that final push to make sure voters get out and vote, because majorities are at stake and our country's trajectory, which is on the rise, is at stake. So go to vote.gop.com, get engaged. This is not an election where you want to wake up the day after and say, I could have done more.
Now, you said that last night you were with the president in North Carolina. Okay.
I was.
All right. So for 9 days, is he out on the road again? It's not even on the road. It's in the air.
He is going to be on the road at an unprecedented pace. Listen, if we keep these majorities in the Senate and the House, and it looks like we're going to expand our majority in the Senate, which is unprecedented in a midterm year of a first president, it will be because of President Trump. He has driven small dollar fundraising for our party, and he has ignited our base by getting out and doing these rallies in important state after important state where his presence shows, we've seen it in the metrics, increases the energy and increases the voter turnout. So he is going to be out there. I don't know how he does it, Jeanine. I'm exhausted already. I don't know how he does it, but he cares so much about our country. And he knows what's at stake, and he's going to do everything we can to keep these majorities.
All right. Ronna McDaniel, thanks so much for being with us this evening.
Thanks. Thanks for having me.
All right. And more on the breaking news out of Pittsburgh. We'll take you to a vigil for the victims next. A vigil tonight for the victims of today's mass shooting inside a synagogue in Pittsburgh. Let's go live now to Fox News reporter Matt Finn, who's at that vigil with more. Matt?
Judge, we're just a few blocks from that synagogue where 11 people were murdered really just hours ago. It is raw and emotional here tonight. And what is so disturbing is all the people we talked to at tonight's vigil say that they still don't know the names of the people murdered inside that synagogue. So many people here in the Squirrel Hill section of Pittsburgh say they are on edge, waiting to find out if one of the people dead is a colleague or a friend or a neighbor. At tonight's vigil, people of all faith came together. Thousands of people stood in the cold rain in silence to pay tribute to those who were killed in their own neighborhood. And then there was a vigil with music and prayers, and one of the chants was, "Hurting one of us is hurting us all." And despite the strength and the love coming together in this community, people we talk to say this neighborhood will never be the same.
It had been a thought in the back of my mind that won't happen. But now that it's happened, it's something we all have to live with, and it's part of this community.
It's only by the grace of God that perhaps the 4 wounded City of Pittsburgh police officers who do a wonderful job will come home.
I've lived here my whole life. I walk around, I know everybody on Murray Avenue, and now it's going to be forever tied to tragic places like other cities like Columbine, Parkland, Newtown. We're going to have this massacre over our heads in the city now.
This Main Street corridor is really the center of the Squirrel Hill neighborhood. Behind me is the Jewish Community Center, and organizers of tonight's vigil said they could not wait another day to hold this vigil tonight. They wanted to prove to people that you do not have to live in fear. And tomorrow morning, Judge, we expect to get the name of the 11 people who were murdered today. Back to you.
All right, Matt Finn, thanks so much. And next, the caravan is coming. We're going to talk about it with a border sheriff who's no stranger to justice. Don't miss it. Next. Developing tonight, the caravan of Central American migrants continues to make its way through Mexico with a goal of illegally entering into our country. My next guest oversees 80 miles of border in southeast Arizona. I actually traveled there in the summer of 2017 and saw for myself with him the dire battle to secure our border. Sheriff Mark Donnells joins me now with reaction to this latest immigration crisis facing our country. All right, good evening, Sheriff. Good to see you again, by the way. Let's talk about what's going on. When I was there with you, and I don't know if they had the two of us on horses. Yeah, there we are. You oversee 80 miles of the border across which you and I rode for a while. But now it appears that the president is sending even more than the original number of troops he was sending, 1,000 more to the border as a result of Secretary Mattis requesting an increase in the number of troops. Their position is that they're going to stop them from entering. How do you do that if you don't have a wall?
Well, that's a challenge. And let me say, I sat in a brief a few days ago over in Yuma, Arizona with Secretary Nielsen, the commissioners from ICE and Border Patrol, and everything's on the table, Judge. Everything's on the table about how do we do this? How do we do this?
Yeah.
You know, and I'll speak. In our county, in Cochise County, we've done some amazing work with our federal partners, Governor Ducey, Congresswoman McSally, local law enforcement. We've done some amazing things to make our county a safer place to live. But I'm telling you, this is bigger than just Cochise County. Yeah. We have a vulnerable county, vulnerable in the fact that we don't have all the fencing, we don't have all the infrastructure, and we don't have all the staffing we need by our federal partners to secure the border. And they come up in this mass. Anywhere on the southwest border, there's going to be a challenge. And we're working ways. And we have a president that's stepping up. We have our local law enforcement, state law enforcement, federal stepping up. We need congressional leaders to step up and join this fight because securing our borders is a constitutional mandate. It's not discretionary, it's a mandate.
Okay, all right. So you don't have those congressional leaders, and in fact, you have people who, in the budget, have pretty much precluded the president from actually doing the prototype of the wall, for which they put in $1.6 billion in the budget, or maybe it was million. I don't really recall. It was 1.6. But the truth is that there are all kinds of tributaries. You know, we talk about one caravan. In truth, you've got your county, you're part of Yuma. You're part of Tucson, and then you've got Yuma, but there's a whole border of thousands of miles. There's no way you can prevent them. I don't care how many military, unless they're standing shoulder to shoulder or holding hands, you can't stop these people. Am I wrong? Tell me I'm wrong.
I can't tell you you're wrong, Judge. You know I would if I could, but I can't in this case. The fact is, we know that. Our federal government knows that. President Trump knows that. And so every community, I know in our community, our local law enforcement, federal partners, we're coming together to make local plans. If they come to our county, if they come to our adjacent counties. So we're working our tails off to secure this border from California to Texas.
You can't do it, Mark, Sheriff, I'm sorry. You can't do it. I saw it. They're going to walk across, and you can have as much night vision and all X-ray and everything else. You can't possibly do it. There are thousands of people. Now, let me ask you a question. Mexico apparently said to them, hey, guys, we'll let you stay here, and we'll give you asylum here in Mexico. Now, my reading of the reports are they said, gee, no, we'll walk to the United States. Was that a real effort on the part of Mexico, or were they just with a wink and a nod saying, say no, go to the U.S.?
Well, you got look at this is the big picture that worries me is the reason they take refugee, and I was told the same thing, the same intel report you're hearing. I was told this a couple of days ago. The fact that they're not taking that, and some did though. The reason they're not taking that is they're coming here because they know they can walk right in
and get money and housing and education.
And cell phone.
And a cell phone. I forgot that. All right. Now, do you believe, Sheriff, that this is a spontaneous caravan? And although, I'm going to ask you this first, immigrant apprehensions in your county and your neighboring county jumped 50% in this past fiscal year compared to last year. So I want to ask you, one, why is that? And two, do you think this caravan is spontaneous, kind of like that protest in Benghazi? It was just spontaneous. It just happened, or was this planned?
You know, first of all, you're right. We're up 50%. This is the worst human smuggling we've seen, migration, in 8 years in Cochise County and along the southwest border. So the reason it's happening is the fact that they can. To answer your question, they can. The fact is, what's stopping them? What's stopping them? We have a president stepping up and saying, you're not coming in. He's sending a very strong message. When President Trump was first elected 2 years ago, the human and drug smuggling went down to nil on the southwest border. His message was clearly received. Unfortunately, they've sat back and watched our congressional folks fight with our president, and now they're saying, hey, they can't control their borders. We're coming. We're coming.
Sheriff, I got to go, but I'm telling you, I'm going to be down there in a couple of weeks. I'm going to join you. Sheriff Mark Donnells, you do a great job. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you.
All right, and a tragic day in the United States of America. Our live continuing breaking coverage of the synagogue shooting that claimed 11 lives and injured at least 6 people. It will continue here in a moment with a special second-hour edition of Justice. We'll go back live to the scene of today's tragedy, and I'll be joined by guests including Corey Lewandowski, several law enforcement, and more from the president, and play some of my interview with Eric Trump. Tonight's special edition of Justice continues at the top of the hour, just after the break. Breaking tonight, police and federal agents learning more about the man who massacred 11 people and injured 6 more during a sacred ceremony inside a Pittsburgh synagogue. Hello and welcome to the second-hour edition of Justice. I'm Jeanine Pirro. Thanks for being with us tonight. Here's what we know. 11 people killed, at least 6 injured. 4 of those hurt are police officers who responded to the scene. The gunman opened fire inside the Tree of Life synagogue during a baby naming ceremony this morning. That gunman, identified by police tonight as 46-year-old Robert Bowers, a man who had apparently posted anti-Semitic hate speech online, but was not specifically known to law enforcement. President Trump has condemned the attacks, but did continue with plans for a pre-midterm political rally in Illinois tonight. Here's some of what the president had to say.
Tonight, everyone in this arena and every citizen across the land sends our prayers to the victims and their families. We all do. We also send our gratitude to the law enforcement officers who were incredible and who risked their lives and sustained very, very serious injuries during this horrible attack. We salute the heroes of American law enforcement. We always do. We know how much we appreciate them, and yet they're underappreciated. They have done such an incredible job for so long, and it's a tough job. We see it now. We see it now, maybe like we've never seen it before. And this is the time to renew the bonds of love and loyalty that hold us all together as Americans. These bonds have always sustained our nation in its hour of need. You know that. Everybody here knows that. And they are always more powerful than the forces of hatred and division, anger and evil. In America, we love our families, we love our neighbors, and we protect our community. We trust in God. We protect the freedom of worship. And we believe in the power of prayer. We defend our Constitution. We defend our heritage. And we rally around our great American flag. All of us here tonight are united by these same American values, and we are all fighting to defend these values. But we can't allow people like this to become important. And when we change all of our lives in order to accommodate them, it's not acceptable. So I thought of it for a little while, and the press said, are you going to cancel these two events? And frankly, the future farmers, I could have done that one. But this is a rally from Mike Bost, and frankly, this one maybe I could have, except I don't want to change our life for somebody that's sick and evil, and I don't think we ever should.
That was President Trump this evening in Illinois addressing the horrific shooting. Let's get the latest on the investigation now from Fox News reporter Garrett Tenney, live in Pittsburgh. Garrett?
Well, Judge, the Tree of Life Synagogue is really the focal point for this very tight-knit Jewish community. 3 congregations worship there, and several dozen people were there this morning for this morning's the beginning of this morning's Shabbat services. A baby naming ceremony was just getting underway around 9:53 this morning when a man walked in with an assault rifle and 3 handguns and reportedly yelled, "All Jews must die," before he opened fire. It only took a couple of minutes for police to respond, but by the time they got there, the gunman had killed 11 people and injured 2 others. When the shooter was on his way out, he shot 1 officer and then ran back inside as the SWAT team moved in. Parishioners in other parts of the building barricaded themselves inside their rooms as the gunman exchanged fire with police for another 15 or so minutes. Eventually, the gunman surrendered after he'd been shot several times, but at that point, he had shot an additional 2 officers. Law enforcement officials described the scene as the most horrific they have ever seen, but said if it wasn't for the quick response by police, it would have been much worse.
The actions this person took today were hateful. We're in the early stages of this investigation, and over the next several days and weeks, we will look at everything in the suspect's life, his home, his vehicle, his social media, and his movements over the last several days.
We simply cannot accept this violence as a normal part of American life. These senseless acts of violence are not who we are as Pennsylvanians. They're not who we are as Americans.
The AP reports that federal prosecutors have now charged the suspect, Robert Bowers, with 29 charges, including hate crime charges. Attorney General Jeff Sessions said those charges will open up the possibility of the death penalty in this case. Now, the FBI says at this point they don't believe the 46-year-old was on law enforcement's radar before today's shooting. He is from the Pittsburgh area. Several neighbors have described him as quiet and someone who have kept to himself, but they say they saw no red flags, according to local reports. Several neighbors also reportedly said Bowers told them he worked as a trucker, he would be in a few days and then would be gone for a few days at a time. The FBI is also investigating his social media accounts and the possibility that he announced his intentions before the shooting on there. About an hour before today's shooting, an account on the social media site Gab matching his name made one of many anti-Semitic posts and concluded with, quote, "I'm going in." That account has been suspended and the data is now with the FBI. We are expecting to get more information on the investigation, the charges, and of course, on the victims tomorrow morning at a press conference at 9 a.m. Judge.
Garbage. Garrett Tenney, thanks so much. And joining me now with his take on today's shooting and the investigation is former Deputy Assistant Director of the FBI, Danny Colson. Danny, thanks for being here tonight. Now, look, one of the things that, people obviously go to when they hear about things like this is they think about whether or not this could happen to me. I mean, obviously, there is empathy, there is sympathy, but I think human nature is such that, could this thing happen to me? So when the president says, as he said today, if the Pittsburgh synagogue had an armed guard, results would have been, quote, far better. Do you agree or disagree with that?
Oh, ma'am, I totally agree with that. Armed security is important, but maybe more important is training for the people that were there. And I think they had some. If you heard the reporter, he talked about some of the people barricaded, and that's what we teach in our classes, barricade or get out. And you need to get ready. When you go to the movie theater, where do you sit? How do you get out of the theater? When you go to a restaurant? That's not being paranoid. That's being prepared. And I do agree with the president. Armed security can stop these things if they're well-trained and committed to their jobs.
Well, what's interesting about this is that this clearly was not a guy, as I spoke about in the first hour of the show, who was insane because he was lucid. He made it clear what his intent was, what he planned to do, and that he was going in. But even more significant is the fact that, you know, he wasn't into getting shot by police. And so, you know, the fact is that when he got into a gunfight, you know, he was the coward who ran in to protect himself. I guess the question that I was trying to ask earlier is, you know, in the private sector, whether you go to church or whether you're at a job, I mean, does business have an obligation to tell its employees what to do, whether it's a synagogue, a religion, an ethnic, religious, sexual, or just a lunatic nut job? This can happen anywhere in America.
There's no doubt about that. It happens in schools, it happens in churches, it happens at movie theaters, it happens at concerts. I think you're familiar with that. So I think we all have, as employers, we have a duty to tell our people, how do we live through these things? It's basic. We furnish them with insurance policies in some cases. Well, let's furnish them with training. How do we live through these things? And remember, police only minutes away. They did a great job responding.
Oh, they were fabulous. Yeah.
Fabulous, but seconds matter, and that's really important. You can do a lot of carnage in 10, 15, 30, 20 seconds, and you're better off having somebody in defending you than having somebody coming to defend you. You want to have your security right there with you.
Yeah. All right. And let's talk about the fact that this guy was a licensed gun owner, apparently had long guns also. But other than, you know, this blog that I find very disconcerting. I mean, everybody said he's a quiet guy. You know it and I know it. We did this for years. He's always a nice guy, always kept to himself, always said hello, whatever. And, you know, then there's a mass murderer. But what he said on that blog, that he was tired of the, you know, HIAS, Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, bringing in the immigrants, and that he was going to, you know, take care of it. He's going to take care of everyone. I'm going in. What are we going to do about that kind of stuff when it makes it on social media? I mean, the First Amendment protects that speech, correct?
Absolutely. He is protected by the First Amendment, and the FBI can only investigate things that the AG guidelines allows them to investigate, and you know that's very, very restrictive. So that's not actionable intelligence. That's rhetoric, and rhetoric is not against the law, even if it's anti-Semitic rhetoric. It's legal. Well, fortunately, it's legal, but there's consequences to that. So we have to be prepared to take care of ourselves. It's very important that we're ready and we're prepared, and we also have an obligation to each other to protect each other. And I think that's something that we really need to think about.
Interesting. Gives us a lot to think about. Danny Colson, thanks so much for being with us tonight.
Thank you, ma'am. I enjoyed it.
Thank you. More ahead on tonight's breaking news throughout this special edition of Justice. And next, we'll talk about the midterms and more with former Donald Trump campaign manager Corey Lewandowski.
I could have had a little bit of an excuse. There was no excuses. We have our lives, we have our schedules, and nobody's going to change it, okay? So and if you don't mind, I'm going to tone it down just a little bit. Is that okay? Well, you're from Illinois. I had a feeling you might say that.
Welcome back to Justice. That was President Trump addressing why he decided not to cancel a rally in Illinois tonight in the wake of that deadly synagogue shooting. As we've been reporting, 11 people are dead and at least 6 injured in Pittsburgh today. Here to talk about that, as well as more on the elections just over a week away, is former Trump campaign manager Corey Lewandowski. Corey, thanks for being here. Your take on what happened today in the synagogue?
Well, a disgusting, terrible tragedy that the nation is going to mourn the loss of these individuals for a long time. But what we have to understand was what was the motive behind this. This is an individual who clearly was anti-Semitic, hated Donald Trump, hated Jewish people for all the wrong reasons, and decided to take it upon himself to go and commit this heinous crime. We need to do better, and we have to find individuals like this, and we need the community to help us find those people.
What did he do that you know? Corey, let me ask a question. What did he do that we know of that could have stopped this?
Well, we don't know, but what we need to know is who he interacted with on a daily basis. What was his rhetoric before? Were there any indications or signs that would have given us the opportunity to go and have a question and answer period with him about a potential tendency to go and commit a crime like this? We have to rely on the people who know him the best.
Okay, yes. He put on a blog that he apparently had been taken off of because of his language, that he was tired of the HIAS, which is the, I think it's the Hebrew Immigration Aid Society, bringing in these immigrant caravans that come in to slaughter us. And so he was sick of it, and he was going to take care of it himself, and he said, I'm going in. So let's talk about monitoring that kind of stuff, Corey. I mean, what do you do there? Do you cross-check whether the guy has a license? And apparently he was a licensed gun owner. But how do we do that?
Well, you know, Judge, the best scenario that I can remember is the San Bernardino killing. Do you remember that?
Oh, yeah.
Where the woman went, and what happened, if you remember, was the neighbors actually called the police and said, we think there's a problem next door. You need to go and investigate it. And the police dropped the ball on that one. And look, as a former law enforcement officer, Judge, I know how stretched the police are. But we need community people. When they see something that could be wrong, they need to let other people know about it. And we need to find out if his neighbors, his friends, if he had any, his colleagues, his family, ever were aware of him saying something that could have prevented this terrible tragedy from happening. But his
neighbors say, Corey, that he was a nice guy, he was a quiet guy, he would say hello, the same nonsense you hear about every serial murderer, you know, in your career and in mine. You know, I think the scary thing right now is that if this guy is alone and acted alone, and we don't know any of this for sure, that any of us can be a victim. And so what does this mean in terms of how we behave? We got to hope that people say something. And you know what, Corey? I really believe that people now are nosy enough, based on the politics of the world today, that they are going to say something. Am I wrong?
No, you're not wrong at all. And look, we need to be vigilant. We need to be vigilant in our communities, in our place of worship, and in our daily lives. Look, the world is a dangerous place, and this past week should remind everybody that anybody could be a victim. What took place today was a horrific tragedy that could have taken place not only in Pittsburgh, it could have taken place anywhere. In small towns and big towns, it could take place anywhere. So we need to be vigilant, and we need to do a better job as a community of looking for problems and reporting those problems.
Okay, so let's say that this guy is a guy who is just a hateful guy, and he, you know, he hasn't been involved with anyone. The question that I think is inevitable to everyone is, do you think he was ginned up by the rhetoric of what's going on in the world today? Whatever side you're on, I don't really care anymore. That he felt by the way, you said it right, he hated Trump, all right? But that this is a guy who, you know, just got fed up with it all and was going to take it out on innocent Jewish people in a house of worship.
You know, I do think I said this recently, I think the rhetoric is very high when you have the former highest law enforcement officer in our land saying, when they're down, we kick them. When you have Maxine Waters and others saying, if you see them in a restaurant, get in their face, go after them, right? That is intolerable anymore, Judge. We've now seen exactly what has taken place by this visceral rhetoric on both sides, candidly. One individual is sending, you know, bombs to individuals, and that's a tragedy. And now we see this disgusting display today. Look, we've got 10 days before an election, and I fight every day as hard as I can for my team to win. But I want to do it fairly, and I want to do it in a manner that allows us to have conversations when it's over. And believe me, Judge, I want to win the election. I fight to win elections, but I'm not going to fight to the point where we're seeing people being killed over it. We need to do a better job as society, and we need to come together and have a conversation when this election is done or before to allow us to all remember one thing. We're the greatest country in the world. We need to work together to keep it that way. All
right. You remember when Steve Scalise was shot on the baseball field. The shooter goes over and says, are they Republicans or Democrats? He gets the answer, the Republicans. He shoots them. Oh, we're all going to come together. Everything's going to get better. Didn't get better at all. Now what?
No, you're exactly right. And I saw Steve Scalise just last week, and he's still walking with a cane. He's made a remarkable recovery. But you have to remember, Judge, not only was he shot and other staff there and other Capitol Police officers were shot.
You're right.
But we also saw, you know, look at what happened to Vanessa Trump. She talked about it. The letter that she opened that had a white powder on it in front of her family, where she had on her face, on her body, she wrote an open letter this week about the horror and the scare that she had to endure for 2 weeks because some lunatic mailed her a package. And we've seen this now on both sides. And what we need to do is we need to remember what's important, what our priorities are as a country. And that should be Homeland security, national security, economic security, and our families. That's what should be our priorities as a nation, and not taking out our visceral hatred on one another.
And yet it was kind of sad, Corey, I have to say, you know, for me in particular, and I fought for a hate crime. I mean, I saw a lot of anti-Semitic behavior, and you kind of wish that that was behind us in our history. But it's almost like a legacy that you continue to go after the Jewish people. I mean, why they're targeted so much, sometimes by the right and the left. I mean, it's just, it is mind-boggling. Anyway, Corey Lewandowski, thanks so much for being with us tonight. Good to see you.
Thank you, Judge.
All right. And more now on the investigation into the Pittsburgh shooting that's left 11 people dead, 6 injured. That shooter, Robert Bowers, now charged with 29 federal counts. Let's get some more perspective now on what investigators in Pittsburgh are up against. I'm joined by the man who led the investigation into another mass shooting, the Mandalay Bay Massacre in Las Vegas just over a year ago. Retired Las Vegas Assistant Sheriff Tom Roberts is on the phone. Sheriff, thanks for calling in. And if I am correct, it is almost a year to the day. It was in October of 2017 that the Mandalay shooting in Las Vegas occurred. Am I right?
Yes, ma'am, Judge. It was October 1. It was a little over a year ago.
All right. And, you know, that crime in particular shocked us. It stunned the nation. I don't know that we've even come to grips with what it was about, why it was done, what was the message. Do we have any clear understanding of this guy? Did he act alone? And then I want to go into what you learned from that we could use here.
Well, I don't think we'll ever know what motivated the gentleman to shoot all the people attending the concert in Las Vegas. We dug and dug and dug through his computers and everything. We never really found the motive, and I don't know if we ever will. Quite different than what you have in Pittsburgh. I think we know exactly what motivated the gentleman today to do what he did. And, you know, and Corey and you were talking earlier, you know, as I think it's important that people, when they see or pick up this errant behavior, either whether it's on social media or whatever, that they say something, so that you do have an opportunity to intervene, you know, before they do act.
Yeah. But, you know, Sheriff, I must tell you, it reminds me of Parkland. I think it was Parkland, where the FBI got a call from people who said, this kid, Nicholas Cruz, he's definitely going to kill kids. He, you know, we said this, this, and this. And, you know, the FBI comes out and they say, oh, we couldn't do anything. It's First Amendment, which was a bunch of hogwash because it was specific as to you know, the name of the person, what the school was, how he was going to do it. They could have checked if he had the guns. But this guy says, you know, I'm going in. I'm tired of the Jews bringing these immigrants in. I mean, this is a guy who was blaming the left and actually didn't like Trump either, who goes in. What can we do when we read these messages? I mean, can law enforcement do anything?
Well, of course we can. I think it's important that when you do read these messages, you report them. Even though the FBI may not be able to open a federal case, local authorities can. And I can tell you in Las Vegas, we did on multiple occasions. Anytime that we had people spewing rhetoric, I mean, we picked up social media posts from Interpol that told us about individuals that were just spewing all kinds of rhetoric, you know, about shooting people, and we went and intervened. And then once we intervened, I think it's important that you continue to monitor those people. We see several examples around the country where we did intervene, but then we failed to keep a monitor on them, you know, and check up with them on a regular basis. Not saying anybody dropped the ball here. We won't know until we dig further into it or find out what exactly was or wasn't done. But, you know, as you look at these in retrospect, a lot of times there were times where we could have intervened and maybe stop something from happening.
Well, I must tell you, Sheriff, I mean, it's always good to hear when someone says, you know, we can act on that, and I absolutely agree with you. I think there's a lot of follow-up that can be done in these cases. I want to thank you for what you did in Las Vegas, and thanks for joining us tonight on Justice, Sheriff. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Judge. Appreciate what you do.
All right. We'll check in at a vigil for the victims in Pittsburgh in a few moments. And next, more from my conversation tonight from President Trump's son, son, Eric Trump. Justice rolls on in a moment. Welcome back to a special 2-hour edition of Justice on this solemn day in America. If you missed it last hour, I spoke on the phone with Executive Vice President of the Trump Organization and the president's son, Eric Trump, about today's shooting and more. Take a look and listen. Executive Vice President of the Trump Organization and the president's son, Eric Trump. He joins me now by phone. Good evening, Eric.
Good evening, Judge. How are you?
Your reaction, Eric, to the horror that happened today in a place of worship in Pittsburgh.
Listen, America mourns, right? I mean, this whack job destroyed lives. He upended a community. He should get the death penalty. I mean, there's no question about it. He should absolutely get the death penalty. You know, there's 11 people who are no longer on this earth because of his actions. And it's horrible. And you know what we do in a time like this also need to give a major shout-out to law enforcement because the job they did today was incredible. I mean, just absolutely incredible.
Right, and I'm going to talk about that more with some of my law enforcement guests. But, you know, Eric, as we look at the news of the past week, is it a sign of the times? Yesterday, someone arrested for sending pipe bombs to several people, and then today, this individual shooting up in a place of worship and killing 11 people, 6 more injured. Is this a sign of the rhetoric and the outrage that people are hearing? Is there any correlation between the two?
I don't know. Listen, there might be and there might not be. I mean, at the end of the day, this is obviously a very sick, deranged human, subhuman. He shouldn't even be called a human, but, you know, I mean, it's a very, very sick, deranged person. They did this, and, you know, it seems like we've gotten to a point in life and society where everything has to be kind of politicized. Everything has to be, you know, somebody has to point the political finger to absolutely everything. I mean, at the end of this day, this guy is a sick person. He did the most unthinkable thing imaginable. He went to a place of worship, shot it up. Again, there are 11 people who are dead now because of it. And, you know, I think we should actually try and pull politics out of some of these things. I mean, this person doesn't represent the left. He doesn't represent the right. The person was sick, deranged. And, again, I truly hope, if found guilty, which he will be, that he gets the death penalty. All
right, and certainly a good point in not viewing everything through the political lenses that people seem to be looking through these days. But let me ask you about your dad. Your dad indicated today that he thought about actually canceling the rally. But he said something interesting. He said, we don't want to let those crazies control, you know, what we do. And it kind of reminds me, Eric, I mean, you were in New York, in New York City on 2001, 9/11, as was I, where we all said we're not going to let these crazy people stop us from conducting our ordinary, everyday affairs. Do you think your dad should have gone through with that rally?
I do, and I thought he said it beautifully. I mean, he said you can't let evil change your life, and I think that's 100% right. I mean, if every single time evil lashed out, it changed everybody's pattern, it changed their lives, it changed society, society stopped, you'd live in a much different world. And, you know, it's always incidents like this, whether it be the 9/11s or, you know, tragic shootings like the one we had today that actually brings America together. And, you know, clearly the person is trying to tear apart, you know, our country apart, a community apart. They're trying to do massive evil. And it's amazing how the world works that, you know, sometimes it actually does the exact opposite. Once you get past the horrible act, it actually brings society together. And, you know, you have an entire country that's mourning for, you know, a small town in Pennsylvania and for a specific synagogue and for a group of people, again, whose lives were upended. And so, you know, this does bring America together in a time where, you know, you can say that, you know, America can often be fractured because of, you know, so many different, you know, variables.
You know, and I think the sad part, it's always sad, but, you know, but the selection of a particular group based upon their religion in a place of worship on Shabbat, I mean, it is a particularly heinous act. But let's talk about what's going to happen in the next 8 or 9 days, the midterms. How does America turn from its focus on some of these horrific things that we're seeing daily in the news to focusing on what's important in terms of the country continuing on the course that it's on, and getting people to focus on real politics as opposed to the rhetoric that is making up politics?
Well, and you do hope they focus on the real issues as opposed to rhetoric. This obviously aside, because this is absolutely horrible what happened, and you have other tragedies. I mean, obviously look at the hurricane that hit North Florida, the Panhandle, of Florida, so hard. But obviously, those are unthinkable things. But you do think that people can get past some of the other rhetoric that they see in the media every single day, because Judge, America's winning right now. I mean, we're winning. Our economy's winning. Our military's winning. Our veterans are winning. I mean, just about everything's winning. I mean, we've got the fastest growing GDP and, one of the fastest growing GDPs in the history of the country. We have the lowest unemployment. Manufacturing is coming back to this country. The stock markets are at record highs. 401ks have done tremendously well, and I can go on and on and on. The price for prescription drugs is coming down, something that my father made a big focus on last week. I mean, I could talk about it for hours, but, I mean, our country is thriving. We're no longer getting ripped off by China. We're no longer getting ripped off by Mexico. We're the envy of the world right now. I mean, America is the envy of the world, and it's hard to say on a day like today when something so tragic happened. But our economy is doing great. Our country is doing great. We're just rated the #1 economy on Earth, and so you hope a lot of the rhetoric gets put aside, and you hope people focus on all the positive attributes and, the many great things that's happening in our country right now.
But, when you talk about it, Eric, it's almost as though there isn't one metric that hasn't improved under your father, and yet the left is so dug in, so angry. And when you see, the rhetoric of people who are congresswomen, congressmen, you wonder how you can get people to take their sights off of that anger and turn it towards something positive.
Yeah, it's almost amazing. When you're doing the best, it's almost people are the most angry, and it's kind of interesting. And I've seen it personally, where you see a lot of the left lashing out, and they don't have a great message right now. They want to double people's taxes. They want to constantly attack law enforcement. Again, days like today make that just unthinkable. I mean, they're the bravest men and women that we have in the country, but
without a doubt,
the country is doing amazingly well. We're winning. We're winning on every metric, and if you can put aside the rhetoric, and you can actually look at quantifiable, statistics and quantifiable measures, our country is doing the best it's ever done before. And as Americans, hopefully days like today make us rally around that we are Americans, that we all, bleed the same red, white, and blue. I mean, we love this country. We love our nation. We want our nation to be successful, and our people to be safe. Everybody should cool it down a little bit.
Yes. All right. Eric Trump, thanks so much for joining us this evening.
Thanks, Judge. Great to be here.
All right. Thank you. Next, more on what we know now about today's shooting in Pittsburgh. We're back live in a moment. A community in a state of shock tonight in Pittsburgh after a mass shooting inside a sacred place of worship. Let's go live now to Fox News reporter Matt Finn, who's at the vigil for the 11 people murdered in cold blood in a synagogue. Matt?
Judge, right now I'm in the heart of the Squirrel Hill neighborhood. Behind me is the Jewish Community Center. And right now the feeling is just surreal, unfathomable, that really just hours ago, 11 people were murdered in a synagogue just a few blocks from here. At tonight's vigil, people of all faiths came together, thousands of people, a sight to be seen as they stood in silence in the cold rain and then carried on a vigil with a little bit of music and some speakers. And what's really so disturbing is that the majority of the people that we talk to in this neighborhood say they still don't know the names of the people murdered in that synagogue. And they're on edge because tomorrow morning they will likely find out if one of their colleagues or their friends or one of their own was one of those killed inside of that synagogue. We spoke to some of those people, and here's what they had to say.
The first thought was to pray, and I was very, very angry that in America, on our soil, that this type of massacre can occur in a place of worship. Probably the worst ever.
Everybody cares for everybody here. I mean, you don't have to be Jewish. Everybody respects everybody, as the world should be. And again, I just can't express the sadness for all of us.
A lot of good energy and prayers coming in tonight, but people we talk to say they now fear, or they know that this neighborhood will forever be known as a place of a site of terror and a shooting like Columbine and Parkland. And tomorrow morning, we expect to get the names of the 11 people murdered here in the Squirrel Hill neighborhood of Pittsburgh. Judge.
Matt, I have a question for you. I understand that the mayor is not willing to release the names of the victims, or not able to until 9 a.m. tomorrow morning. But for those individuals, and I guess the fear is that you're not able yet to get the names of the next of kin, and I understand that. But for those people who are there and who think that their mother or father or sister is in there, why can't they answer that question now if the closest family members are there? Do you know?
Well, you know, Judge, perhaps the people we were talking to tonight weren't next of kin. Maybe next of kin has been notified, but some of the people at the vigil said, you know, I know someone who does go to that synagogue, and I'm not sure if they were in there today. I haven't found out yet. So maybe they're not direct family members, but they are friends or colleagues or co-workers or a neighbor.
All right. Okay. Matt Finn, thanks so much for being with us tonight. Are you more vulnerable in a place of worship than you may think? We'll answer that question and check in with the latest on the investigation next. The suspect is in custody, but the investigation into today's mass murder inside a Pittsburgh synagogue is really only just beginning. Bernard Zapor is a professor of the School of Criminology and Criminal Justice at Arizona State University. He's also a former special agent in charge of the ATF. Bernard, good evening.
Good evening.
All right. Now, I understand that in your experience in 2012, when you were with the ATF, there were 13 murders inside of a temple. Do you see anything, or did you learn anything from that that you think needs to be applied in the investigation into the synagogue shooting in Pittsburgh?
Yes, Judge. Of course, one of the big takeaways is just the bottomless depravity that we have as human beings against one another.
It's true.
And unfortunately, and it is demonstrated today, there is no ceiling to the goodness of people like these officers who put themselves at risk to save more members of this community. The takeaway from the Sikh temple massacre was that when you're in church, you're in your place of worship, your body's there, but your mind and spirit is elsewhere. That's that much more of a disadvantage, that much more of an advantage of somebody who would commit such an act, for somebody to have even that millisecond of a chance to gather themselves to perhaps run, hide, or fight.
And, you know, it's interesting, too, Bernard, because when you're in a church, I guess, or a temple or a synagogue or wherever, your back is to the door, isn't it?
Well, I think about the horrific Texas church shooting after Las Vegas massacre. With those poor people, they were in a box. They were facing forward. The shooter came in with his assault weapon and harvested innocent people. And it's just catastrophic.
Well, you know, the president today said that, you know, had they had a security guard, it might not have been as bad as it was. And I mean, so where are we now? I mean, you know, you think that the murder of innocents over their religion or their ethnicity is something of the past, but it is not. And in today's, you know, highly charged rhetoric, whether it's part of it or the equation or not, I don't know. But these kind of things should have stopped a long time ago. What do we do now, Bernard? I mean, in your experience, what you've seen, what does the individual who's watching this show say to himself, you know, when I'm in the mall, when I'm in, you know, synagogue or church, or when I'm in my car at a red light?
I profess to everybody that I could even speak to, and I think this should be a standard for any place that holds meetings, that has employees, that has customers, that we must teach the run, hide, fight protocol. You may not be given the opportunity of one of these choices, but people that are familiar and had these seeds put into their brain of these options, they can survive. People have survived these events because they were able to take one of the choices given to them. There's a very short 4-minute video online called Run, Hide, Fight. It was a partnership with Homeland Security. Everybody should watch that. Everybody should show that to their children and be aware of it.
Bernard, if I don't see it, we don't have a lot of time. Run, hide, fight. Do you run away?
Run, hide, fight.
Yeah, but okay, where am I running to?
If you have the option, it comes to you, you escape. You could be hearing this activity preceding actually running into the gunman or the gun person. The hiding is 2 types. You're either hiding where you're concealing yourself, or you're barricading yourself into a room or an office where the person can't get in. And then the third is you never beg for your life, because this person is sociopathic. They do not hear your pleas. They don't care. You fight for your life and do whatever you can if you have that option of stopping them. Even with Run, Hide, Fight, people still die in these events.
Yeah.
But there are some that are preventable if we teach it. If we teach it through our communities in every level.
You know, you've got a lot of experience, Bernard. I mean, you know, you look at the Las Vegas shooting, I mean, the Wisconsin, the Temple shooting that you talk about, aside from what you did your whole career in ATF, where are you on the issue of guns? Should we have guns in schools and you know, I think every church, every adult place, but what do we do as a society, given the fact that you look at Chicago, that where guns are illegal, the only people who have them are the criminals? What do we do? What does your experience tell you?
My experiences tell me 3 things. One is we do not have a significant or effective mental health treatment in the United States for assessment and treatment of people with destructive, self-destructive tendencies. Secondly, there's almost 1 billion firearms in the United States. We have to deal with the fact that they're here, they're not going away. And thirdly, throwing somebody armed at a facility is not necessarily the answer unless we train people specifically to be solely a counter-assault person.
Right.
And that could be anybody. It does not have to be a law enforcement officer.
But they're trainable.
They could be trained specifically
Okay.
for the purposes of this.
All right. I got to take it back. Bernard Zapor, thanks so much for being with us tonight. We appreciate your expertise. We'll be right back.
Thank you, Judge.
Finally tonight, 11 people are dead because of a killer who targeted them only because of their faith. Police say 46-year-old Robert Bowers stormed into the Tree of Life synagogue in Pittsburgh this morning during a baby naming ceremony and opened fire. In addition to the 11 killed, 6 people were injured. 4 of those wounded were police officers who ran toward the gunfire to save innocent lives. And so a special thank you to all the men and women in law enforcement who risk their lives to keep us safe every day. Thanks for watching. I'm Jeanine Pirro, advocating for truth, justice,